I don't know if you've ever recorded yourself and then turned and watched it, but it's so awkward. It's really awkward. So I've worked here since 2013, and I've done so many different jobs here and loved every single one of them. This is not one of them, teaching. That's not been one of my job descriptions. So the last time I was up sharing my story and how God was working in my life was 5 years ago. I hope that doesn't scare you and you don't run out of the room and be like, okay, John, what have you done? But I just hope that you'll I'm going to share my story, and I think when we share our story that there are times when we can resonate with that. And so my prayer is today that maybe my story will resonate with you in a way, and that you'll walk out of here today feeling encouraged and just hearing from God in the way that you need to. So when John asked me to come and teach today, we were in the middle of a series called Weeds in My Garden. And if you missed that, I would invite you to go back and watch it. And all of our resources are on the website. You can find everything there. But we were taking a deep dive into mental health. So it was a good series. It was a hard series. And I think I heard a lot of people have the same kind of comments as me was, whoa, okay, I hear you. I'm listening to you, God. And so during that series, my thoughts kept taking me back to the teaching series we were doing 5 years ago when I last shared, and it was called a road trip. And during the series, each of the speakers, we did an exercise, maybe like a lifespan timeline exercise. You don't have to be an artist to do this, okay? Super easy, so no excuses not to do it. You just draw a line on a piece of paper. And on the left side, you put a line that indicates the day you were born, and on the right side, you put today, your age today. And in between that, you're going to plot events in your life that you remember. They may be good, they may be bad, fun times, hard times, but these are the events that made the biggest impact in your life. And so I'm going to give an abbreviated version. I'm not going to give you all 52 years, okay? You ready? So my first core memory, and I like using the name core memory because it sounds cool. You know, the new generation uses core memory, so it makes me feel a little bit younger. So my first core memory was when I think I was 4, and we went to Disney World. I don't remember what I wore. I don't remember what I ate, what we rode, what princesses I saw. I don't remember any specifics, but I do remember this. The magic of Disney happened. And it happened big time in me. And it carried over to my daughter, and still to this day, I want to go to Disney any chance I get. So thankfully, I have a Disney buddy because my husband doesn't feel the same way. But if you want to go and you need a babysitter, Shelby and I will go with you. We don't even have to ride a ride, but we just love Disney. It was a really, really good, strong core memory for me. And then the next thing I remember a few years later was I was in 3rd grade, and I made a really bad grade on a test. And I thought what all smart 3rd graders would do is, I'm just going to sign my mother's name. Well, that wasn't very smart. Unbeknownst to me, my mother and my father were really good friends with my teacher, Mrs. Sabilski. They grew up together, and they were good friends. So I bet you know where this is going. They had a really funny conversation about what April had done. So they had a big laugh, and I got a big punishment for that one. It set in my brain, though. I never did it again. When I was 13, my grandfather, who we called Papa, he was just my buddy. I did everything with him, fished with him. He just was everything to me, along with my grandmother, Mimi. But he had a stroke, which left him unable to speak, and he was paralyzed. And he lived the rest of his life in a hospital. And that was really, really hard. It was the first time I realized, like, okay, bad things do happen. And then I get into 9th grade, and I didn't have a lot of confidence, but this young man who was 2 years older than me, he took interest in me. I thought he really liked me. We started dating, and let me tell you, he was the love of my life. We were going to live forever together, have the children, the picket fences, and everything. You know, we do this in 9th grade, right? Well, he broke my heart. He just absolutely broke my heart, and that was really, really hard. Then came an exciting time. I got ready to go to college. Really good memory, but terrifying at the same time. It was really fun, created lots of trials, led to a lot of really bad decisions. But I did become a nurse. So I was in nursing school, but in my 3rd year of nursing school, my grandmother, Mimi, was killed in a car wreck. And this absolutely rocked me to the core. This is the first time I remember like asking God, like, what are you doing? Like, that's not nice, God. That is not nice, because that is the nicest woman I've ever known. She was an angel walking on earth, and so I was lost, confused, and just really angry. Marriage then came later. So a lot of things happened in between that, but I was so blessed to meet my husband, Kevin, and thankfully God knew what he was doing back in 9th grade when he says, that's not the one for you. I didn't understand it, but boy, I understood it when I met Kevin. And then, of course, that led to our 2 amazing kids, Shelby and Trevor. And so marriage and parenting, all full of great times, lots of trials too, but really good times. So 2011, I lost my best friend in a car wreck. In 2012, we started going to church here, and this was the first time I remember like having an intentional, growing relationship with Jesus. So lots of events happened in the next few years, but I'm going to fast forward to a year ago, April, when my husband and daughter and I were in a car wreck. And we got hit twice from behind, and we were just having the best time that day. We'd gone to play pickleball together, and things were great. And then just like that, everything changed. And I had a neck injury, and the pain from it it's been over a year, and it changed everything about my life. I couldn't sleep. I was grumpy because I couldn't sleep. I couldn't do what I loved, and that was to play pickleball. And I know that sounds silly, but it was like great exercise. It was great community of just a whole bunch of people that hung out together. It just stopped that. It was something that Kevin and I shared together. Even down to work. Work became very difficult. And so it was just a long year of just struggling through that trial of the pain from the wreck. And it started to just affect everything. Because, when you're in a trial for a while, you just get tired. It just kind of keeps going. And I found myself very discouraged and starting to really second guess a lot of things about my life, about my calling and my purpose. And it's just because I was just tired. And a really cool opportunity, God just shows up always at the right time. And it was offered for me to go to a place called the Ranch of Hope in Colorado for a 5-day intensive counseling. And if you've never done anything like that, I would tell you should do it. It's a really, really cool thing. So we're out in the middle of literally nowhere in the Colorado mountains. There was maybe 10 houses within 25 miles. And it was so out of my character, that I would get on a plane by myself and I would go stay with people that I did not know, because if you know me, I'm a scaredy cat. And certainly everybody, something's going to happen to me while there. I don't know these people. But man, God just showed up so big in those 5 days that I was there. So that's just a brief recap of 52 years. But what I didn't mention in my timeline were the decisions that I made because of my reactions to these events. Because each event, it does it for me, it's going to do it with you, it's going to leave you with a decision to make. How are you going to react to that event, that trial in your life? And so these reactions that I made, sometimes they were consciously made, but many times I wasn't even aware that I was reacting or changing. I was just aimlessly getting through them. If you did this exercise, and I really, really, really hope that you will, it doesn't take long just to get those events put on your life, but it's just truly life-changing. I think you would probably agree, like I did, that the trials are going to be more prevalent than the good times on your map. Because let's face it, the hard times, the trials, those are the ones that are going to stick out the most. They're the ones that are going to have the potential to shape us the most. So the thing about trials is if we don't stop to process and work through them, we will end up at the end of that life map feeling very lost and confused and wondering what our purpose was. And so that's where I was again when I went to Colorado, and it was just great. We spent a lot of time those 5 days in the first 25 years of my life. And the first time that my counselor, Dave, looked at me and he said, "Whoa, that's a lot of trauma." And I was like, I didn't like that word. I was like, trauma? I hadn't had trauma. I'm fine. But we kept working through it, and I realized, okay, I did have a lot of really hard trials in my life. There were a lot of things that I never stopped to recognize, and I certainly never dealt with them. And so then what came out of that, I recognized I made a lot of really poor choices. So primarily, that was just me not dealing with my trials. I pushed through them, depended on my own strength, because I was able to identify that there was this definite shift with my responses before 2012 and after 2012 when I began an intentional relationship with Jesus. So on day 3 of my week in Colorado, the activity was we would sit and we'd talk for 3 or 4 hours. And the first day I was like, oh, is this ever going to end? But then the next day I was like, oh, this is cool. Like I get to just talk. I get to just talk it all out. And then the exercise after we were done talking was, okay, now go work it out. And the thing about being in the middle of the Colorado mountains with no distractions is you can just ride and think and talk to God all you want. And so that's what I did. And so the thing that kept coming to my mind in my rides in the afternoons was this, that trials are not bad. They feel bad. They feel really bad. But also that if I will humble myself and I will allow God to work in me, I have the potential to be transformed. There's something great that can come out of the trials if we just allow them to. And that was a whole new revelation to me. And it was so freeing in that moment. And so to think something great can come out of a trial is very difficult to see. Like, can you agree with me that it's a little bit harder? So, and I think that, like I said, I think this is just true for everybody. And maybe you can possibly even identify with some of the thoughts when you're facing trials. These are some things that I have thought through over the years. Is if he is a good God, why does this stroke happen to my sweet granddaddy? Why would he do that to leave him unable to move or to speak? If he's a loving God, why does he allow people to hurt us? If he's for us, then why do we experience disappointments? So how does he take an illness or a death, a diagnosis, or a car wreck and turn it for good? And here's the deal. Trials are going to happen. That's certain. And so what are we going to do with them? What is the purpose in the trial? And I believe that before we can answer that question, we must first understand that nothing happens in our life without purpose. God didn't design us to walk aimlessly without purpose. And if we choose to do that, to not sit in the trial and to seek him, that we will live a very unfulfilled and disconnected life. We'll just always be searching for the meaning of life. And so that begs the question for all of us. Trials are going to happen. What's the purpose of the trial? And so we're going to sit in the book of James for just a minute, and I love the way that he puts this in the beginning, and we're going to read that in just a second. But I think he does an excellent job of illustrating how God uses the trials, his goodness in those trials, and how we can position ourselves in such a way to be transformed and fulfill our purpose. So it's important to remember he's being written to believers. So it's written to people that have put their trust in Jesus and they understand who God is and his faithfulness. So just read it with that lens. And the recipient of the letters, they're experiencing persecution and famine. We don't have the same persecutions that they're referring to here, the same famines, but maybe you feel like you're being persecuted in the trial. I know I can feel that way. Why? Why is this happening? Why did that wreck happen? We were so happy 30 seconds before that. And why did the wreck happen? And now everything had to change. And, it leads to a starvation effect. I got tired. I got weary. I felt disconnected from God. I was in a spiritual famine. So it's a little different, but it has the same effect on us now. And so when I look back and I see all of that, I can look back and I can see how I got to that point in my trials. So my trials are different from yours, and our trials collectively are different from theirs. But I believe that there are some truths that we can count on. So there's 3 things I'm going to touch on here. The first one is I believe that trials reveal God's goodness, which changes absolutely everything. So James 1:2-4, it says, "Consider it great joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you experience various trials, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its effect so that you may be mature and complete, lacking nothing." At first glance, this looks like it's saying that we can find joy and that we're blessed because of the trials, but that's not what he's saying. The key word is because and how you read it. It does not read you're blessed because of the trial. It's saying we can have joy because when we stand the test, when we don't run from our emotions, when we don't blame others or God, but when we trust him in the trial, we will receive the gift that he has promised. So why do we have such a hard time seeing the goodness in the trials? I believe it's because we're being deceived. When we're weak and we're struggling in our trial, when we're confused, we're depending on ourselves to get through it, the enemy will come in and try to confuse us. He has lots of tactics. and he personalizes them to every single person. For me, his tactic with me is through shame and guilt. That my sins and my mistakes that I made out of the hurt and confusion of my trials, they were the reason that these other trials kept coming. And don't get me wrong, some of our trials are due to our decisions, but that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about this irrational belief that because I was sinning and I was making bad mistakes, that my grandmother was killed in a car wreck. That's irrational. But see, the reason that that set in is because I wasn't where I was supposed to be there that morning. I should have been at home, and if I had been the one to drive Mimi, she wouldn't have been in the car wreck. It wouldn't have happened. But see, that's just what the enemy wants to do. He wants to confuse us, and that's his tactic. So the enemy would love for us to believe that if God was good, that if he was powerful, that he was loving and forgiving, he wouldn't allow these trials to happen. James 1:16 through 18 says, "Don't be deceived, my dear brothers and sisters. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. By his own choice, he gave us birthright by the word of the truth, so that we would be a kind of first fruits of his creature." So he's telling us right here, don't be deceived. Be constantly aware of the input that we are receiving and what we're believing. We absolutely have to be armed with the truth of who God is. And that's he's loving and he's powerful, he's merciful, and he promises to love us and guide us and protect us through every trial. That will not change. It tells us right there. So the truth is, we find this all throughout Scripture. It's not just there. It's just over and over. We can read this, that people in the Bible, that they're telling their testimony of this. And it reminds me of Jeremiah 29:11, which is a promise to the nation of Israel. And I just think it illustrates God's character so clearly. And it says, "For I know the plans I have for you. This is the Lord's declaration. Plans for your well-being, not for disaster, but to give you a future and a hope." This verse, it just gives me so much comfort when I read it. It gives me chill bumps, actually, when I read it. He has plans for me. He has plans for you. And that's not to hurt me or to hurt you, but it's to give us a future and a hope and a purpose. And the goodness of God is evident in those promises in the character of who he is. So when we see the goodness of God, it changes how we view the trial. So when I personally look back at my timeline and I can see how God moved in the lives of the people who cared for my grandfather. So he spent 5 years in a hospital, and it felt like every nurse, every person in that hospital, they just had like the light of Jesus in them. I can remember my grandmother talking about how they cared for her. It just made such a difference, that they would pray with her, that they would care for her. And that ultimately is what led me to want to care for others. That's what led me to want to be a nurse. It's like, I want to do that. Like, man, those people made a difference. So when I can see that, when I see the goodness in that situation, all of a sudden I'm not confused and I'm not angry anymore. When I look back and I see my family draw closer to God and begin going to church for the first time in years after the death of my best friend, it changes how I view one of the hardest times in my life, because, man, we saw God. Everywhere we turned, we saw God in that time. When I see how God is redeeming my story, which is full of mistakes, full of sins, by allowing me to help a teenager understand that her mistakes do not separate her from God, but that she can see that he loves her despite of those choices, changes everything. It changes my guilt and my shame into a story of redemption. So when we choose to see his goodness, it changes how we see our trials. So don't get me wrong, I'm not inviting any trials in. There are plenty happening, okay? Plenty. One trial this morning was, what am I going to do with my hair? Because this mic is in my face. Just kidding. But I'm not inviting any more trials in. That's not what I'm saying. But this is what I promised myself, that if I will choose to lean into the trials, what I'm going to get to see is that I can trust that I will find God there. If I will just choose to lean in, God is going to meet me there. And that applies to you too. You can trust in his promises. So number 2, trials can bring us closer to God. One common variable that I can pinpoint in every single trial in my life, my first response is always the thing. I'm going to take control of that situation. I got this. I got it. Even if I can't control everything, I would find something that I can control. I know this about myself. I may have been called a control freak before, okay? But it's the only way I could manage. I had to control something. But what that is, what that's saying is that I'm just depending on me. Do you do that? Is your first response? All right, so the problem with this is, get this, okay? It might hurt a little bit. It hurt when the person said it to me. We're acting out of arrogance and pride. And that really stung, but that guy was so right. That's arrogance and pride talking, and God did not design us to live that way. He didn't design us to rely on our own strength and not His. So trials, they just seem to last forever. And when we have a devastating medical diagnosis, we lose a loved one or experience a trauma, it just doesn't go away overnight. They typically just drag on and on. You know, the good times are like, dang, I wish that just would keep happening. This is so great. But the good times seem to just go poof. But the bad times, the trials, they just kind of keep going. And when we carry that load alone, like I said earlier, we're going to get tired. We're going to get overwhelmed. And we possibly might even begin to lose faith. So I love in Psalm 34, 17 through 19, and remembering that David, the writer here, think of him as that's the shepherd boy David. That's David of David and Goliath. That's David and Bathsheba. I mean, this guy can talk about trials, all kinds. Things he brought on himself, things that just happened, but he can just speak to it. So this is what it says. He says, the righteous cry out, and the Lord hears and delivers them from all their troubles. The Lord is near the brokenhearted. He saves those crushed in spirit. Many adversities, trials, they're going to come to the one who is righteous, but the Lord delivers him from all of them. So He promises to come when we call, to comfort us, to deliver us. He promises to be near us when we're just crushed and we're brokenhearted in the trial. He's going to be there when we feel like, I can't do it. I can't get through this trial. He's promising, I will be there. When you're crushed, when you're down, when you're tired, I am going to be there. So when the trials come, and they will, He promises to draw near Him, and He will draw near to us. So the question is when the trial comes, are you going to draw near Him, or are you going to run from Him? So we've established trials. Number one, that trials reveal God's goodness, and that changes everything. Number two, they can bring us closer to Him. And number three, they reveal growth. So trials reveal growth and transformation. I'm going to read James. I'm going to read that same passage again, but I'm going to read it in the Message version because I really love the way that it's worded here. It says, consider it a sheer gift, friends, when tests and challenges come into you from all sides. It's a gift. Wow. Never thought of it that way, right? It's a gift when challenges come at you from all sides. You know that under pressure, your faith life is forced into the open and shows its true colors. So don't try to get out of anything prematurely. Don't run from it. Don't justify it. Don't control it. Just let it do its work so that you become mature and well-developed, not deficient in any way. So they're going to keep coming. They're going to put us under pressure. Their trials are going to expose our weaknesses and our vulnerabilities. But if we try not to avoid them or cover them up or justify them and allow God to work in them, we will be transformed. So if you try to shortcut the trial, you're circumventing God's plan and purpose. By doing the work it takes to heal and lean into God, letting endurance have its full effect, we're actually positioning ourselves in such a way that God can use those trials for good. We can see the purpose in the trial. So looking back on the trials in my life and seeing God's goodness and faithfulness, that's grown my faith. Every time I look back and I see, no, God did lift me up. He got me out of the bed when I was so crushed and brokenhearted. He got me up, He was with me, and He healed me. That builds my faith. That builds my trust in Him. This is why it's important that you do this individually. When you look back on those events and you do the work, you allow to sit in it and let God work through the trial, He will transform you. I don't call myself weak anymore. I call myself strong. I don't call myself confused anymore. I have clarity. So it's not always easy, especially when the trial is very heavy and it takes lots of practice. It's not a one-time deal where we just get through the trial and everything is great forever. He's told us up there it's going to keep happening from all sides. So we have to practice and we have to work at it. But by trusting and allowing Him to work through our trials, He transforms those difficulties into opportunities for growth and fulfillment of His purpose for our lives. So for many years, I missed it just because I pushed through the heartache and the pain from losing loved ones or experiencing disappointments. I missed seeing God work in those moments. And taking those 5 days just to sit in the emotions by myself with God and the decisions that were results of my trials in my life, it humbled me. It humbled me greatly, which was such a gift. And I drew closer to God. The work is not done. It's never going to be done. But what we can do is just choose to lean in from now on. From this day forward, look at your trials as opportunities and just lean in. So I'll ask you, how might your present trials look different if you trusted God's goodness and you allowed Him to work through them? If you didn't run from them or try to control them, how might your life look different? If you view them as opportunities and not something bad, how might that change how you heal from your past trials and you view your past mistakes, those decisions that came out of those trials? And I ask the same question, we need to do this, we need to ask ourselves in the past, in the present trial that we're in, but we're also preparing for the future trial. We have to be ready because they're going to keep coming. So I don't know what trials that you're facing right now or what you've faced in the past. But I do know that God doesn't want us facing them alone, believing the enemy when he says our trials are due to our mistakes and doubting God's love for us. God does not want us crushed. He doesn't want us broken. He does not want us to stay in our pain, our shame, our guilt, or despair. He wants us close to Him, full of hope and full of purpose. So it might feel really, really heavy right now, but I just ask you, don't turn back. Don't ignore what you're going through. Just lean into it. And we're gonna continue the song, God is Able. The band's gonna come back up and we're gonna sing it again. But there are a few lyrics in there I just wanna touch on that hit me pretty hard. And it says, I've come a long way. I've seen how you work. There's so much goodness and grace, and it's so much more than I deserve. We've come this far by faith. And I just can't turn back because He's not done with me yet. There's nothing we can do to push God away. There's nothing we can do that He won't show up in our trial. So just lean into Him and let Him do the work. Just let Him do the work. So we're going to sing the song, but I would love just to pray. And I ask you that when you stand up and worship, just let the words just seek in with you. So God, we just love you so much. And Lord, we just thank you that, God, we can just trust your promises, that we can trust who you are, and that is that you are loving and that you are kind, and that, God, you know what is going to happen way before we do, and you have already made a plan for that. There's a purpose in that. So, God, I just pray that we can just be humble in those trials, that we can be vulnerable and we can just chase after you, trusting that you're going to help us through it, that we don't have to carry the burden, we don't have to control it, God, that you've got it. So no matter what we're facing in here, whether it's a diagnosis or, there's just hard times, maybe we're going through a divorce or just dealing with some really hard things that have happened in our past, God, I just pray that you would just make your presence known, that you would just wrap us in your arms and just be a constant reminder of that love and that goodness and grace that you give to us, even though we don't deserve it. So we love you, God, and it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.